Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Welcome in. We are so thrilled to see you all here today to learn how Printer Logic completes your zero trust environment. Before I hand it over to Corey, our Chief Technology Officer, I'd like to briefly remind y'all that with Printer Logic's serverless solution, you can centrally manage direct IP printing and eliminate print servers while easily updating and deploying new devices from a single pane of glass. Without further ado, Corey, take it away.
Thanks, Katie. And I'd also like to extend my welcome today. And we're here to talk about like one of my actually favorite and one of my favorite topics, and that is zero trust. You know, it's something that we've been tracking for a long time here at Vasion, something that we watch for, something that we've been looking into, something that we've been building for. And there's been a lot of progress made towards zero trust. And before we kind of get into that, I just want to take a minute and just talk a little bit about what is zero trust? What are the components of zero trust? What do you have to be thinking about inside the zero trust framework? And to me, it boils down to kind of 6 major pieces. The first one being identities. How do you deal with identities? The next is devices. Like what does it mean in zero trust world for devices? Applications, how are they changing? How are they enabling zero trust? And then you get into infrastructure, data, and network, and how important those components are within the zero trust framework. You know, if you have done much studying with zero trust, what you find is that it's not a new framework. It's something that actually has been around for almost a dozen years or more. In fact, it was 2010, I think, that a lot of the analysts started talking about zero trust. And at the time, it was all conversation, but there was one initiative that got kicked off, and that was an initiative called Beyond Corp. And Beyond Corp was actually picked up and fostered by Google. And it's been the basics of what zero trust is today and what zero trust is becoming tomorrow. And Google's really been after this, and they're probably leading the charge on a company getting to the point that they're, hey, I'm implementing zero trust. But they've been after this since about 2010. Like, they've been after trying to figure out, how do I trust yet verify? And what does that mean for my users, for my devices, for my network? And it's been a journey. And I think if we talk with Google today, I think they would still say, look, we haven't arrived. There's still things we need to do to continue our journey in zero trust, in that framework. So when you think about zero trust and implementing zero trust, it's not something that you wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm going to go implement zero trust today. A couple of days later, you kind of check it off your list and say, I'm done. I'm ready to go. Zero trust is a journey, and it's a multi-year journey. It's measured in years. And there's a lot of aspects to it. And sometimes it can get really overwhelming, trying to figure out where you start, how you start, what you need to do next when it comes to that zero trust. And today, I'm going to walk you through some aspects of each one of these components and talk a little bit about some of the challenges and get really specific about how companies who are trying to enable zero trust for partners and for customers, what they need to be thinking about and how they build for it. And then I'll touch on what we've done here at Vasion with our Printer Logic solution. But before we do so, I mentioned that zero trust is something that we watched for a long time. And the way that we watch technologies here at Zero Trust is we actually leverage the technology adoption curve. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this is the idea that something hits market and it starts out with innovators, like those early adopter people, like those people who are kind of on the edge saying, like, hey, I want to do something new. And technology will grow from that into, if it proves out, into a little bit more adoption into what they refer to as the early adopters. At the edge of the early adopters, you get this chasm where a lot of technology falls into the chasm and falls off. And I'm sure a lot, every one of you are familiar with applications that you were really liking at the middle, then all of a sudden they kind of disappeared off the marketplace. It's because they couldn't make that leap. They weren't powerful enough of a message. They weren't powerful enough of a solution that's solving a particular problem. They fell into that chasm. But once you get over that chasm, you're kind of in the space of, look, eventually this is going to live out this technology trend. It's going to grow into early majority, then on into late majority, and eventually it's going to get to the point that it's laggards. And you're decades as you process through that technology. Well, up until a couple of years ago, before the pandemic, I would put zero trust framework technology down in the innovator space. And usually it takes a long time to go to innovators up to the edge of the chasm. Today we're looking at it, and we kind of place it at the edge of the chasm mainly because the pandemic has forced a lot of different thinking, a lot of force in hybrid work, a lot of forcing people to work from home, to work completely remote. And how do they do that work? A lot of people were caught kind of flat-footed when that happened, with a lot of dependency upon physical location and access in order to get the job done. And so as people migrated out of the office and went to work at home, people started exploding into cloud adoption around applications, not just processing power, but have like what applications I can deploy to my remote team, my hybrid team. How do I get them on board? And so that's really pushed this idea of zero trust, because when it comes down to it, the zero trust framework is the modern framework for supporting a security-based solution that has to deal in this new world of hybrid working, applications out of cloud services, some local applications, services that are local, all of those things. There needs to be a wraparound with this zero trust. So that's really pushed it up to the early adopters. And I don't think it's going to slow. Like this isn't something that's going to fall into the chasm and fall off by any means. And there's some real strong tailwinds behind this right now. One of which is the US government. Like I think in May of 2021, the US government came down and said, look, we need to modernize our security model across all of our branches, across all of our departments. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to force a zero adoption. So the government's like, after analyzing all the different models of security, are saying zero trust is the thing. It's the thing that's taking us forward. That's a huge tailwind. And then you get companies like Microsoft, who traditionally has been very on-prem, very perimeter-based, very focused, but as they've extended into the cloud with Azure, offering cloud services, a lot of they also recognize, saying like that traditional way of doing security is not it, but zero trust is the model going forward. Another huge tailwind. Google's been after it. Like Google started this, they've been after it for 12 years, and they've proven that it works. They've proved that it's a good, strong model to move forward with. And finally, I was reading some trends last night, and Zscaler sent out a survey to several hundred cybersecurity experts in the field, and was kind of poking a little bit around VPNs and what's going on with VPNs, because the whole motion of zero trust is that you can essentially get rid of that VPN at some level. And there's been a lot of cyber attacks against the VPN space, whether it's software, whether it's hardware VPN. And 80% of those respondents came back and said, look, we have it in our plans to move to zero trust and do away with that VPN. So it's going to be something that falls off. So these tailwinds are going to drive zero trust across that chasm, I say within the next year, easily. And then a lot of majority of companies are doing it. And if you're on the call and you've started your journey of zero trust, if you haven't started your journey of zero trust, I'm sure that somebody has some initiative somewhere in your company to say, let's improve its security. I need to move to the cloud. I need to get these services. I'm going to move forward. So zero trust is here to stay. It is the new model of the right way to do security. And let's kind of get into those different aspects now and start talking about how do you get going on zero trust and how do you implement across that, especially when it ties into print. So we talked about identity being that first component, and it's typically where people start. Because usually what happens is you start leveraging cloud application services, is all of a sudden you have to worry about users and you have to worry about their identities, and you have to figure out, how do I validate that same identity across multiple applications? How do I get it to a single identity with a single password? How do I implement that SSO? What do I do with that SSO? How do I drive those groups? How do I pull all those applications under one umbrella? And a lot of people will look for identity providers to help do that. Once they've kind of collected all those applications and they've standardized on an identity and gotten a single solution or an SSO password in place, the next step really when it comes to identity is to apply the next level on top of that, which is, okay, now I have you a single password, but I need to do a little further verification of who you are before I allow you in to use applications. And that's when MFA comes into play. So multi-factor authentication, and most of the time, cloud identity solutions will support multi-factor authentication. And it's now what you apply to your identity security is a facet of, okay, you know something and you potentially have something. So with those two items, I know even more sure that you are who you say you are. So a lot of it, stems with, okay, give me your email, give me your password. I'm going to send you potentially an SMS text with a code. People are moving into authentication apps where you sync up an authentication app with a random code that code becomes the component that's the multi-factor authentication, gets you into the applications. Now, as an application provider or somebody who's building out applications and providing that to customers, these are things you have to think about. Like, how do I make it easier for this endless job of IT managers about securing the network, securing users and devices? How do I make their job easier with my application? Because here at Vasion, we've been on this journey. Like, we started this journey a couple of years ago to move into zero trust framework. And it took us a long time to figure out SSO. We learned that through this process, all of a sudden, that not every application that we wanted to bring in SSO supported SSO, or we had to pay extra dollars for it, or it was really cumbersome and I had to engage their support engineers or even their professional service to help me connect it up. So as you think about this as a builder and also as a provider, there's standards that's been defined and that you implement your solution that makes life easier at the application level. Everybody knows of SAML. SAML 2.0 makes authentication communication, like it sets up the trust relationship between your identity and your application so that you can have that common identity user. OIDC is a future version of that also builds in additional access points and capabilities into that. And then OAuth2 is the basis of making sure that that communication is absolutely secure. And every application that you want to bring under the umbrella of SSO and zero trust, delivering on that identity portion, needs to respect these things and needs to be able to connect together. And those applications that even make it easier for you by providing native integrations into a lot of the common IDPs out there, make your life as an IT manager even easier. So if you have an application that has fully embraced Okta and made it super easy so that when you go configure Okta, you just go to the Okta marketplace, download that application version, comes with a lot of the configuration, you sync up some tokens, you make the connection, you're immediately granting access to users and rights that particular user for that particular application. It makes it super simple to add in these applications. And as an IT person, all of a sudden you realize, man, I really so appreciate those applications who do exactly that for me, because I'm trying to bring 50 applications into the fold, into this zero trust identity world, trying to turn on single sign-on, enable MFA across all 50 of those. It's an overwhelming job. And I so appreciate those people who make it super easy for them. That's exactly what we've done here at PrinterLogic. Our solution supports all of these manufacturers from a native integration perspective, making it as easy as possible so that when you get to the PrinterLogic app, pulling that into your zero trust environment and putting identities in place underneath that is a few clicks measured in minutes before you're fully integrated, and that solution's across the board. The other thing, so I spent a few minutes talking about identities. The other thing that is really problematic and something that you have to think about as you are implementing the zero trust framework in the space of identity is starting to define and understand not only the user and validate that that user is that user, but also trusting what that user's working on and what might get exposed based off that user working on or get access into your environments. And there's this has been this big movement for a long time that it's not about the systems. For many decades, it was all about what system are you logging into, what OS do you have. Nobody asks that anymore. In fact, a lot of people are just bringing their own devices, and it's not about the system any longer. It's about the user. It's about that user and how he accesses and what they have access rights to. But you still have to be careful about those systems that are coming into your space, because underneath, they may have vulnerabilities that you don't like. So you need to have implementation, or your IDP vendors need to be able to support policies being applied to systems that enforce things like latest antivirus, latest malware detection, encrypted drive, like forces those types of capabilities on those devices as part of your authentication and your trust to get you into the network. And a lot of the modern IDPs do exactly that. They support that exact model so that as I enter in and I try to log in, before it actually allows me to authenticate, it's verifying that through MFA that I am who I am, and it's verifying that the system I'm using has all of the right policies built on top of that system. And the last piece of when it comes to identity that you really have to think about is, okay, now I know who you are, I know who your system are. Now what I really want to do is start monitoring a little bit of your behavior, because that gives me even more indication as to when I should prompt for additional validation, additional authentication, or I should trust that you are in a very safe place. So for instance, if I'm a user and I log in from a system that I'm familiar with, great, I will do a single sign-on. Maybe my policies are such that multi-factor comes as an access level privilege, and I let you on. But if I notice that you're logging from a different system, I might prompt differently, and I might block some of that policy. I might not allow you access to certain systems because there's vulnerabilities on that particular device that you're logging into, so I'm going to block you. Or it's about monitoring kind of behavior. Like if you're logging in most days from your home network or from an office network, and all of a sudden we notice that that's a common behavior, we've done a lot of deep validation throughout that process as you're logging in, all of a sudden you don't have to worry about as much validation. But if all of a sudden you're identified as being logged in from a public place, maybe a coffee shop or something, there might be a further, well, hey, you're outside of the world. Is this still you? Is this still a device we're used to? We want to just validate that even deeper. So here's MFA. Here's a policy I'm going to just double check on your machine. So that's all called adaptive management when it comes to identity and system processes. And again, when you're building out applications and you're providing the solution, you really have to be thinking across the board here and how that plays out, and how does that solution, especially if you're a client server app, how's all those agents running on that system adhering to that authentication, adhering to those components. So that's really, when it comes down to identity, that's what's really important when you think about implementing those identity pieces of zero trust framework. Now, when we get to application control, that's the next level. So now it all of a sudden becomes about the application. So one of the things that, and one of the parts of identity management or identity providers they provide the ability to basically allow you to ConnectScam, which is a system of cross-identity management. And what that does is it allows you to do real-time provisioning of users into applications, and applications can get those users. And the reason that's really important is because as you onboard users, as you bring users into your company, all of a sudden you want to grant them, based on who they are, the role that they're going to play in the company, certain access to certain applications and systems. And if an application is not adhering and pulling that data automatically, you end up having to run around to a bunch of different applications enabling things. Whereas if it is adhering to that, as soon as they're onboarding, you put them in a group, and as soon as they're assigned to that group, all of a sudden they're getting the proper applications, and those applications are now, that user's now getting permission in those applications to do a level of stuff, of things that they need to accomplish. This also applies as people move from one role to the next role. As people move from one space to the next space, all of a sudden, if I'm a support engineer and moving into sales, I have access to applications that in support that I don't need access anymore when I move to sales. So how do I turn those on and off? And again, if you follow this process as an application, it's easy. As soon as you move, you decommission permissions for those old applications, and you grant new permissions for the stuff that's needed in their new role. And finally, on the way out, like if you're moving people out of your company, as soon as you turn off their account, you want those accounts to automatically disable across and within every application that's pulled those users into. And if you don't have a SCIM component, that doesn't happen. Really critical. At PrinterLogic, we support SCIM natively. Now, there's a couple other levels within the applications that you have to think about. Once you get those users and groups provisioned inside the application, you have to start looking at role-based access control. Role-based access control allows you to grant specific permissions and capabilities down to a granular level. In fact, you want most of your applications to support custom level access permissions so that you can actually go in and build out a custom level based on, I need this user to have access to these settings or this menu option or these capabilities. I'm going to grant them. Some common things about this is if I'm an admin, maybe I have rights to globally set settings versus if I'm more of a report user, all I need to do is see and run reports. I shouldn't have access to those permissions, right? So you need to have a real strong base on granting that permission. And then finally, you also need to be able to provide that scope to, or a scope to those users as well. So for instance, a good example is this, to say I'm a report person running reports and I'm based in the US and we're a global company and I should only see data in the US. I need to be able to grant a scope for that data in that US for that report user so that he can come in and see his job. But I don't really want him seeing data out of EMEA. So scoping that data down, and that's what our role-based access control is. And as you look at this, this is a real key part of the next level security in securing your application and your users within that applications. And your application needs to validate those users that, again, remember, they were provisioned by the identity management after we already validated who they were and what devices they're coming from. Now let's give them the right permissions and ensure that they only can access that. PrinterLogic solution, like we're really granular on these rights. This is something that we've been evolving now for several years. Now, the last big chunk of Zero Framework becomes the next level. And that's all about how do I reduce my attack vector? How do I eliminate some of that space that cyber bullies could actually access or get into in my environment? And if you look at this, traditionally, a lot of companies kind of wrapped a perimeter or firewall around all of their users and their servers and their local resources and their corporate. And they would put a gate at that perimeter. And as soon as you were able to get through that gate through a level of authentication, everything inside of it is somewhat free, easier to get into, easier to penetrate. And when you start implementing cloud applications, all of a sudden, this model just doesn't work. It's hard to wrap that solution. You can do it through a bunch of magic networking stuff and a lot of effort, but it's really difficult to start wrapping your perimeter around those cloud applications. And it becomes really tough. And then all of a sudden, when you do so, that attack vector of once I get in, I can attack stuff just continues to grow. So part of Zero Trust is all about reducing that attack vector. And what a lot of companies do is they start moving into that second, third phase of Zero Trust is they start shrinking the attack vector. So they've implemented identity and trust and adaptive, and they have applications that are adhering to the users and doing real low-level access permissions inside the applications. And once that's all the case, all of a sudden it's like, I don't need you in a perimeter. I just now trust you and I allow you access, and I only give you access to that specific resource or applications within the space. So that allows me to shrink the perimeter of my network down. And it allows me to open up all of those resources that are outside that network because I now trust and verify it multiple times throughout the process of usage of that resource or that application. The challenge with this comes when you start shrinking down the perimeter and all of a sudden I have devices that I can't move to a cloud, or I can't eliminate, or I can't get outside of my perimeter. Things like printers, like there's no such thing as a cloud printer today. Like I don't have a service that I can print something to magically paper shows up. Like I have to have this physical device that's sitting inside the network. So what happens is they start shrinking their perimeter just around those devices. And when you do that, it creates a problem for those users who are now sitting outside that perimeter. And you don't really want to allow them in because you don't want to open that up to just anybody getting into that perimeter. And a lot of the technologies that's used to print are technologies that require certain ports to be open in order to do that printing. And then when you shrink that parameter down, now you've blocked it. And that becomes a real hindrance when you think about shrinking your attack vector and you try to implement that in the zero trust world. And so we've delivered some technology late last year that really solves this problem. And I want to take just a minute and walk you through that technology. It's called off-networking technology. And what this does is this allows us to shrink that perimeter, wrap that network around those physical devices, pushing out all users and all devices, and allows you to be able to print. So say, for instance, you're sitting in an office, you're on a public network, and there's a printer sitting right there, and you try to print to it, and you can't because there's a firewall between you. It's on the perimeter of the network. Well, what we do is we simply put a small agent in that same network with a printer that reaches out to our SaaS solution in the cloud and establishes a secure tunnel. And then we've deployed an agent out to that end user's device, and that agent handles making sure you have the right print drivers in the right location, all of those things that are a little bit annoying too when you deal with printers. Like we just magically do that for you. And then when the end user just says file print, what happens is that our agent says, oh, can I reach that printer over local network? Oh, I can't. There's a firewall in the way, or 2 or 3 or 4 firewalls in the way. So let's establish a secure tunnel via our SaaS solution in the cloud down to our little agent within that network, and let's send the job that way. So we establish that secure tunnel. That job goes from that endpoint device through multiple firewalls over the secure tunnel using SSL and gets directed out and prints. From an end user perspective, they clicked file print and it printed on that device that's right there. And they didn't have to worry about anything. From an IT perspective, you didn't have to engage with any of your security compliant people. You didn't have to worry about opening ports. You didn't have to worry about making your network more vulnerable. You didn't have to worry about leaving that network perimeter big, all of those things that apply right into zero trust. Pretty cool technology. You can tell I'm really excited about it. The other thing that when it comes to kind of data leakage, which is an aspect of zero trust, like how do I minimize that data leakage? The number one data leakage when it comes to printing is really all about somebody printing something, getting up from their desk on their way to go get it and get distracted, forget to go pick it up. In the meantime, somebody else goes up to that printer and all of a sudden those pages that are there, they go to grab them thinking they're their jobs, looking through it. It's like, oh my gosh, there's some real confidential stuff. Like, I mean, let's be honest, this has happened to everybody. If you're in IT, it might personally happen to you. If not, I guarantee it, one of your end users, maybe these execs come to you and said, hey, we got to figure this out because I can't run to the printer. So sometimes the solution is for you to put a printer in every exec office. Well, now all of a sudden you got even a bigger issue with that perimeter of that networking, and how do you deal with all of that stuff as you're shrinking. It's not a solution. The right solution is really what you've heard about most likely is secure release printing or pull printing. And what this does is this allows you to actually print the job. But when you go to print the job, you're prompted to hold, or perhaps it's a company policy, it gets held in a queue, and that queue happens to still be on your local device, so it stays very protected. And it just sits there and waits until you actually physically get in front of the printer. And then when you're at the printer, there's actually an embedded application that forces you to do that authentication to validate that it's you, leveraging that IDP or those identities pieces that you set up. And you can have all realm of different security models, like a username and a PIN, or perhaps a badge card that you can actually scan that knows it's you, it's been issued to you, or a mobile device maybe that has an application and you have to log into the application. Maybe there's even a QR code that you can scan that makes it easy so that you can see the jobs you have to do. And then when you're physically standing there and you've been validated, you then say release the job, and that job comes out and you can easily take that job. Hugely, I mean, it completely eliminates this issue of data leakage at the printer when it comes to leftover print jobs. And it helps enable that zero trust space. So as we think about all of these things, like at Printer Logic, we're here about enabling this journey because it's a hard journey of implementing zero trust. And I so appreciate, I often wear the CIO hat here at Vasion too. I so appreciate vendors and partners of solutions we're building to do these types of steps to make it simple for me to be able to enable zero trust. And as a final step, what we've done is we've actually taken all of these solutions and we've put them in a bundle and made that bundle available on top of our core solution, which by the way, our core solution provides all the different device capabilities. It provides the connection to identity management, provides all the RBAC, but there's additional pieces on top of that that are really important. As we talked about, I talked about off networking, how important that is that. I talked about mobile release printing, talked about secure release printing. The one I didn't talk about is concurrent IDP support. And this is really important in your journey too, because oftentimes, again, zero trust implementations measured in years. So oftentimes an SSO implementation is measured in months. And so when you're migrating from one old legacy, say LDAP into Azure AD, it's a big migration, and there's groups of users that happen, and you need to support both of those while you're doing that migration. That's exactly what our concurrent IDP does for you. It allows you to support multiple of those applications as you roll through them. And in addition to that, like, even if you have the perfect setup and it's like, I've got Azure AD, or I'm on Okta, all my devices are, what happens when your company acquires another company? There's a migration period that happens. And that's another really valuable thing that happens with our concurrent IDP. So this is a bundle we've put together. Check it out. Check it out on Vasion.com. Check us out. We love to help enable zero trust. We've done an enormous amount of investment in our solution we provide to do exactly that, so that you don't get to the end of your game and be like, oh crap, what do I do with print? Like, we're here to help you. So thank you for your time. And I would love to jump into some Q&A now, Katie.
Yeah, we actually have some questions already submitted. I popped in the chat and asked for questions just a few minutes ago, so we have a few coming in already. The first question is, what are the major pitfalls that implementing zero trust have when it comes to printing?
That's a great question. I like, when it comes to zero trust, if you're anything like what we've experienced here at Vasion, you get really excited about zero trust and you get really focused on the different aspects of zero trust, the identity management, and you pay a lot of attention to those key business line applications, those key services, the key devices you have in the company, and you start your whole progress of going down that journey. And then in the last minute, it's like, oh crap, what do I do with printers? So the biggest pitfall is that the printers are often not thought about it. not thought about in the sense of my zero trust migration until you're already committed down a certain path and you get all the way there. And it's like, oh my gosh, my printing solution today doesn't support. I have legacy print servers. It doesn't support it, that don't connect into even Azure AT. Like it doesn't support my journey. And all of a sudden it becomes this big blocking, this big sticking point that becomes an emergency. That's the biggest blockers I talk with customers and that people experience is just like, oh, I don't want to get there and just not have the support I need.
Yeah, that's huge. Second question, how long does it take to implement printer logic in my environment to enable zero trust?
That's a great question. Because we talk about zero trust, and when you think about implementing new applications, especially when you think about eliminating infrastructure, like taking out print servers, that could be an overwhelming size project. With our technology, like we've been doing this for a long time. We started out really early. We got really good at helping people move off a Novell network, Novell print into Windows print. So we got to learn that Windows print component. So we built some really cool applications that assist in mining. So, I mean, we simply point at Windows printers. We can pull in all of the data around the printers and their objects and all their drivers. And then I mentioned that we're fully native integrated with IDP. So that's a matter of minutes. Like within about 30 minutes after a quick demo, we can have your environment. We can have pulled in printers from your print servers. We can have connected IDP component. We can have pushed out an agent, deployed a printer, and had you printing. And so with us, like, depending on how big your environment is, I mean, we're talking measures in days or maybe even in weeks, and you're up and running. Your entire environment's been moved into this new space of something that's now a major smooth sell when it comes to your zero trust journey.
That's wicked fast, considering like how big organizations can be and like the scale of their print environment. Like that's huge.
Yeah.
Third question that we have, do you support PivCAC style cards?
Oh, that's a great question. I talked about some of the ways we release print jobs. And for those of you who don't know what a PivCAC card is, it's typically a government issued identification card that has a scanning capability on it. But on these cards, they also embed certain certificates to grant you not only access to things, but level of access to things and to validate who you are. And we went to a great effort to actually support these devices, not only at release time, but we also can turn it on to even make the print experience more secure by enforcing that end user to submit that card into their scanner at their device or at their computer. And this is a common thing in a lot of government agencies where you actually put your card in to actually allow you to log in. Well, we enforce it to make sure that card's logged in. And then when you do a file print, we actually leverage some of those individually certificates off that card, and we actually wrap the print job, and then we store that print job. And then when you go to release it, you have to use that same card, and we leverage that same cert, again, another level of validation before we release it. So again, it's just this next level of trust, validate, and how deep do you want to get as you roll out your zero trust initiatives. And so it's something that we fully support. We have a lot of customers who are using it, and it's a real value. In fact, I'm starting to see a trend where those cards are starting to get adopted in a lot of the healthcare facilities, just from a data protection perspective and level of data protection needs to be around individual information. So it's a powerful thing.
Yeah. Okay. This question is a little bit more in depth. So they asked, I noticed that off-network cloud requires an agent to create the secure tunnel. Do you have plans to move that directly to the printer to eliminate that agent?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. And the short answer is yes. Like we're currently working on tech. And in fact, we have a preview that's available now that takes that component that's needed to create that secure tunnel from the agent that's running and moves that into an embedded application that lives on the printer, eliminating yet another potential single point of failure when it comes to release printing. So now, if you think back about that off networking printer printing diagram that I had there, we can totally cut out that agent device that's needed, and that secure tunnel will now be established right to that in printing devices, even giving further point to point, like from protection of the print job going through that secure tunnel. So the print job secure goes all the way to that printer and is actually held locally and then streamed to itself, and not allowing any type of interaction or any type of penetration on getting that print job. So that's a preview. Check us out. If you're interested, please reach out to somebody and we're happy to bring you into a preview on that, give you an experience on what's going to happen.
Yeah, I just shared the link to schedule a demo in the chat if you're interested. But again, we're not here to push you. We're just here to educate right now. So if there are no other questions, we will wrap up 3 minutes early. I'll wait just another second or so, but I think we'll probably wrap it up.